Hello, everyone, and welcome to What Culture Horror. I'm Josh, joined today by Scott Tilford.
Oh, good Lord, hello.
How are you doing, good pal, on this fine day?
I'm doing pretty well. I kind of forgot that I'd said I would do this podcast, but I like the horrors quite a lot. I like movies. I like all sorts of different things. And we'll have a lovely band, won't we? So I'm up for
Scott
it.
Tilford, you forgetting things is a What Culture cliche, which leads us quite nicely into the topic of this video, because today we're going to talk about horror movie cliches, and specifically the ones that we love. And we're going to talk about, we're going to essentially dissect some sillier parts of the genre and discuss what makes a horror movie sequence or scene or movie entirely tick, and kind of talk about when the use of cliches goes too far and when it can also indulge sort of a fan's enjoyment, and when it can make scenes punchier because we can almost anticipate it and get kind of like caught up in the, the formulaic nature of it. Because even though cliches and tropes and whatever, they sometimes get a bad rap, you know what I mean? We do a lot of list videos taking the piss out of them most of the times, but I think deep down, there are a lot of cliches that at least I love personally. I don't know about you. I don't know whether you're completely sick of the general horror movie formula and, people, jump scares, cats being there all the time, stuff like that.
Cats being there all the time.
Cats, that's a big horror movie cliche.
Okay, I know you've got your big list of tropes, but I think for me it goes both ways. Like sometimes it's just a lovely comfort blanket and you know what you're in for. And I think something like a good slasher film, they play into those tropes. I almost watched Final Girls the other day because we had a list on the website about sort of like overlooked slasher flicks. And part of me just knows what I'm in for. And like I said, it's almost like this twisted comfort blanket because it's a horror, it's bloody and gory and people are getting killed, but because I know what I'm going for, it's kind of awesome. The flip side though is just for me, I know we can potentially get into this later, it's just when I went to see Halloween in the 2018 one, when the reboot sort of continuation thing, it didn't work for me, and it was too expected, and I kind of just like thought it was too much of the same thing, and I kind of wanted in a way, I wanted someone who has, birthed so much originality in the first place to do something else that was incredible and new. And so I loved seeing so many parts of Halloween, but I also ultimately came out of it going like, that was kind of more of the same and it wasn't cool.
Yeah. I think especially in the era we're in now, where we have sort of these sequels / reboots / reimaginings of, iconic properties, I feel like the horror movie fan or the horror movie watcher is more savvy than ever, and they're more clued in about conventions, and the writing has transformed according to that. I think obviously Scream was the first big sort of meta horror that kicked this whole thing off, commenting on what horror movies are and bringing to the forefront, how a horror movie is constructed, and then sort of playing off that. But I mean, Scream was like 20 years ago, and to an extent we haven't really evolved beyond that. And I think there is a way that some horror movies sort of fall into a trap of thinking they're smart just because they're addressing a cliche and just pointing out a cliche, but then they're not actually doing anything with it. And sometimes when that happens, I actually prefer the movies that just play it straight, because at least there's something genuine to that.
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird because to me, I remember when I did a little bit of film studies in high school, and I remember our film studies teacher saying he was going to make us hate film because we were going to analyze every single, cinematography, specific frame shots, specific framings, blocking, whatever. There's a lot of stuff. Horror for me, and I don't really rethink this after I say it, but I feel like horror is one of the most predictable genres in terms of the way that it's shot. Like for me, I feel like you can predict the vast majority of, especially jump scares, or just specific framings will clue you into where something's going to come from, or obviously the mood they want to put you in. Sometimes that gets too formulaic and gets too expected, and that's what, like I said, it bounced me off Halloween in as much as I did like that stuff. But I think that cinematography side of it, it's like it's both welcoming, it's like I know what I'm in for, but it is also so expected. So it's kind of just, I don't know, it's kind of both things at once, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think me, Kirsten, and Ash did a podcast a long time ago on sort of jump scares in general, and I guess that'll be a good jumping off point for this, because jump scares for me, even if they are cheap or whatever, I think they can be done right, because sometimes the structure of a horror movie, and I've also said this before, is kind of like a roller coaster, you know what I mean? Where it's almost the anticipation of something, what's going to happen, and it's whether or not they can execute it well and if they can pull it off well. And sometimes you just like to be sort of strapped in and you don't mind knowing what's coming, because I mean, nothing, especially now, is wholly original, and these are cliches for a reason, because ultimately they work and they can be implemented well if they're sort of treated with reverence. They're not just sort of leaned on if it's not just the whole thing that you had. But to be honest, Oh, go on. I saw your face squirm.
I have to, my golden rule with jump scares, I don't know how many people agree with this stuff, is that the thing that creates the jump scare for the audience has to have also made a noise in the film. And what I mean by that is that you can't just have a character put their hand on someone's shoulder and then it goes like fring and we all freak out, but it wouldn't have made noise in real life. Because I remember Quiet Place is one of my favorite recent horror movies. And there's a bit in that where Emily Blunt looks back up the stairs, she's in the basement and she sees one of the creature's legs go past the door. And the sound for the audience is like this massive big spike of volume, but it wouldn't have made any noise in the movie. And it doesn't make sense. It can't just be for the audience. It has to be something that would be screeching, make a noise, whatever. It has to it has to make sense for me, for me to not think it's too cheap.
That's interesting, man, because you've already stolen my thunder and actually went straight into the first cliche, which is the person putting their hand on the shoulder of something else, when that absolutely doesn't need to happen. Who greets their friends by just putting their hands on the shoulder or like touching their face? I don't do it, man, especially now. Yeah, especially in 2020. I normally say, "Oh, Scott, like your pants are down" or something. You know, something innocuous that wouldn't cause a jump scare. But for me, when it comes to creating something like that, I don't think the sound itself has to be diegetic or like in the actual movie itself. But I do think something on screen at least has to be inherently scary. Like obviously it gets me because it's that visceral human reaction to jump at loud noises, but I always feel a bit annoyed if I'm caught off guard by a friend sneaking up on their other friend or they're touching their shoulder and stuff. I always find that a little bit cheap. I quite like it when filmmakers get silly with it. If it's like a toaster popping up, it's just something completely stupid that it's kind of played off as a joke and your reaction. Yeah, at least it's something like your reaction of relief is supposed to be accompanied by a chuckle or whatever. But if it's like something lazy, like someone walking into a room and not talking and stuff, or someone forgetting that someone's in a room, it's always someone in a room or walking out of a door, and I do quite like it because of how dumb it is, but also that's one in terms of jump scares. It actually does take me out of it a little bit. It's
traditional. Like that's the thing. I just feel like because I've seen thousands, hundreds, I don't know how many films I've seen, but a lot. Like you get used to it, whether it's through cinematography or whether it's through the score building or just whatever it is. And it's like, okay, let's just get this out the way. Like okay, we're waiting for a big volume spike. Let's carry on. Like I kind of need something else. And so like I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but I like when you get a volume spike, you get the exhale, and then there's something else immediately after it, or they do something that plays with the rhythm of what a jump scare should be. I think it's just a case of doing something with it that isn't just the volume spike itself. But
that's a good point, because you as an audience, you expect certain things and you pick up, even if you're not a film student or something, you pick up on how a scare is constructed. You pick up on the cinematography, like you said, the expected flow of the build up, the big scare, the relief, and then like the cool down when nothing can happen. But when filmmakers start mixing that up and they start putting two scares together or start kind of offsetting your relaxation period afterwards, that's when I think they can work really well. And even though jump scares, like PG-13 horror sort of has this inherent bad rap of, oh, it's not real horror if you do this, I think it can be done well, and you can play with the cliche of it in interesting ways. One jump scare cliche that I genuinely just unashamedly do love is the one that comes at the end of like a post-credit sequence or at the very end of a movie. And even though you expect it, even though you know there's going to have one final stinger, like it always works for me. It's always that kind of one final gotcha moment where I'm like, I know what's coming. I know what's going to happen.
Are you talking about the ones where the creature appears for one last time and eats the camera? Like that happens every time, with just some giant set of jaws coming at you.
And I know it's dumb, man. I know it's stupid. And I remember in the case of Sinister, I remember that happening. And it doesn't make sense within the context of the film. It's purely for the audience. Right. But back when we could go to cinemas safely, like I used to love that stuff. I used to love the anticipation of it actually happening.
It's in Paranormal Activity as well, where like at the very end, after the character Katie, I think she's called, gets completely possessed. She just eats the camera. Just sort of comes back into the room after she's killed her boyfriend and just goes at the camera. Just sort of like, I'll have a bit of that as well. Makes no sense whatsoever, but
I like it because it's like the filmmaker's not broken the fourth wall for the entire thing. Like never acknowledged the camera. In the case of Paranormal Activity, you have, but in most cases, like they don't acknowledge it, and then they're like, right, we're going to completely break the illusion of this whole world just to have one final joke on the audience. And I quite like that, man.
It's got nothing to do with the podcast right now, but the whole thing with that movie, I know it was the case with Blair Witch, where they told them contractually they couldn't talk about being in the movie. But I don't know if that was the case with Micah and Katie or whatever in Paranormal Activity. How did they even explain in this quasi-realistic explanation of Paranormal Activity that she ate the camera and then it was still made into a movie that they found and then, shared?
A good segue, Scott, because I didn't have this written down, funnily enough, but the idea of like the found footage movie on two counts here. One, the person actually committing to it in spite of everything, and the footage actually being found and edited by something. Like I remember back in the heyday of Paranormal Activity, like you said, people got so annoyed and so upset and so frustrated because it's like, well, why would they keep filming? Who's editing this together? Who's putting sound effects and music on it? Yeah. And to me, that like never bothered me because I was like, in the heightened reality of this situation, I don't care. It's fun. It's fun and it's scary. And it's like, sure, he's got this camcorder, sure. I used to like it. And I think it was Diary of the Dead way back in the day. Like they used to, I think it was in Wreck as well, where they had to have the thing where it's like, oh no, my camera is running out of battery. I'm going to have to stay in this incredibly dangerous situation and charge it because I can't move on without it. You know what I mean? And like, that is the kind of cheese.
The thing is, I remember, because I love Cloverfield, the first one. And I remember I think I was just so caught up in the hype of Cloverfield and the fact that I was seeing it. And I just loved that movie so much. I still do. But in that movie, I remember the immediate criticism being that Hud, the guy, the cameraman, that there's no reason why he would be, filming his friend being mauled by a tiny creature or filming like anything. Why would he be looking through the lens at this point? Why would he have perfect framing and stuff? But I think that genre would break if you ever acknowledged that in a more meaningful way. Like if they had to, I don't know, stop and frame it properly or something.
I think we got to the point just in general where we sort of got over it as well, where we just didn't have to. It's kind of like, when you had zombie movies, like originally, you used to have to stop and explain all the rules. Like, if you get bitten, then you turn into a zombie, or you've got to shoot them in the head. And at some point, we all just kind of realized that, yes, we've seen enough zombie movies. We know the rules. You don't need to explain them. I feel like we got to that point with found footage or mockumentary, anything, where it was just like, we don't have to explain or justify the frame and device. This is just a subgenre in its own right. Like, this transcended even horror. Like, I remember Parks and Recreation, the show, that was another mockumentary kind of format. Like, they don't really explain why that's in the mockumentary format. It's just like, well, this is just how we shoot the show now. And I like that with found footage. Yeah, like The Office did. I suppose they, towards the end, sort of brought in, like, revealing the show or whatever.
Yeah.
I like that you don't need that anymore. And even back in the day, I used to quite like the elaborate excuses that they had to justify what the hell was going on. Like, I always found that really daft and really silly and really good. But I'm a big fan of found footage. I don't know what you think in general about that. I've gone very dark.
You have?
It's spooky in here. Not a bit that. Just, I thought my electric went off. I'm back.
I like the idea of filming the horror podcast and some sort of, especially a found footage one. And
exactly, mate.
Host part 2. I was going to, as the final addendum to that point, I was just going to say, I think audiences in general, mass audiences, horror audiences, are way more learned, way more acutely aware of tropes and traits and stuff than some mass market studios give them credit for. I think you can play with that a lot more, and with the modern day especially, everyone's sharing tropes and stuff online more than they ever were before.
Totally. I mean, I want to kind of move on next to more kind of like visual cliches, I suppose, in what is classed as horrific these days. Because, when we go through like phases of this is scary, then it's like this trend is scary. Then we've got Ouija boards, we've got possession movies, we've got whatever.
Upside down crab girls.
Upside down crab girls, and also little children with like long mouths. I don't dig that, man. I don't dig it when like they do anything with mouth. I don't like it in Pennywise. I don't like it in It Chapter 1 or 2, or even the Tim Curry version, where his mouth goes all big and you get the big teeth coming out. That always kind of breaks the horror a little bit. I know people are scared of that, but that's something that I think is. I like when it shows up. I think it's goofy, but I never find the big mouths at all scary.
I think the body horror can be done so well. It's just that like anything with kids, I mean, this is going to be stuff that we love, but I think anything with kids has to be done very specifically. I think if it's just, he is a child, therefore scary, I'm just going to be like, well, he seems quite canny. He seems all right, to be honest. He's quite friendly. As long as I don't go near him, he's probably not going to come near me. It's all right. But it can go both ways.
It kind of a little bit. One that I particularly love, and I'm just going to start reeling them off, is when you get like someone. It kind of links with the children one. Because when you have like these children in horror movies, and they're always sort of, they're not possessed, but they've got like a link to the afterlife. In they're sort of like writing stuff down. They can see things, and they're making these horrific drawings. I always love that, because if I saw any child, doesn't matter if it's my own, even if a child on the street, drawing some of the things in these movies, like I'd be sending them to jail. There'd be no calling social services. I'd be calling the police.
It's always a burning house as well. It's always a burning house with a stick man.
Yeah.
No one's figured out how to do like sort of like rounded limbs or anything. It's always just a couple of stick men.
It's always like the parents are like, oh, Johnny's just going through a phase. He'll be all right. And I'm like, I can't remember much about my childhood, but I'm certain that I didn't have a drawing burning house phase or drawing hanging parents phase.
Of all the things that were sort of magnetized to my fridge, there wasn't one of the family home burning down in the corner.
Yeah. I like anything with sort of, when it comes to like the writing and sort of drawings and stuff, in Seven or whatever, when you have like kind of like John Doe's scribblings, you've got like the writing all over the wall and stuff. That's a horror trope that I never really questioned. Like I never really found it scary when you've got like this writing all over the walls. Like it's something that I'm almost numb to, because I've seen it in every horror movie ever, even like daft ones, like the Number 23 with Jim Carrey. Like you've just got, if you're a madman, yeah, if you're a madman, then you write on the walls for some reason. It's never explained. It's unclear why. Is that scary? I don't know, but I quite like it as a bit of set design.
I do, yeah, I definitely like it as a bit of set design. It reminds me in video games, in Heavy Rain, it's obviously very Fincher style, but in Heavy Rain, when you go to one of the initial suspects of the case, this murder mystery case, and you find this guy who has loads of like crosses just hanging from the ceiling and all this like scripture written on the walls and stuff.
Yeah.
I kind of wonder if like the overall point of doing that stuff is maybe just fundamentally outdated. This idea that mental affliction, being so addicted to like, having such an obsession to the point where you're scrolling it on the walls, is inherently scary. Whereas now I think we would just try and help that person. Not just feel like, this is something that we need to try and address.
It's an interesting point, like, especially when it comes to, more topical issues like that, when it comes to sort of depictions of mental illness, and, you've got like psychos and whatever, and the way, cinematic shorthand is used to convey that. I think it's almost in some ways kind of like got like lazy, and I do feel like we're beyond that in a lot of ways, like to convey the mental state of these characters. You see the same sort of cliches and the same iconography pop up over and over again, like the scrollings like we've mentioned. And I do wonder whether or not we're ever going to get past that and get not something more positive or whatever, just sort of change it up so it is a bit scarier at least, or at least more unknown, because I think a lot of these cliches...
50 to 100 Google Keep notes, just scrolling everything down.
Hey, I don't know why I'm pointing with this. I've got very excited. I was pointing with this controller. Mentioning Google, though, this is one of my all-time favorite horror cliches, is when something horrible is happening, something potentially supernatural is going down in the house / apartment building / suburban neighborhood, and then the hero just Googles what's going on, and then like the first hit is the like exactly what they need.
Newspaper clipping that was the exact article that was written about that town.
Yeah, I love that stuff. I love it because like it's almost like scriptwriters don't know anymore how to get this information across without it being a bit cheesy. Like I feel like we've just sort of settled on, well, we live in the modern age, so we would go to the internet. But it's funny how like these characters see one hit, like I said, read one article, and they're like convinced. They're like, well, this is definitely an evil being called Bagul, and now we're going to have to phone up this phone number on the thing and then get more information. And I like it when it's not Google as well. It's some fictional like Lugal or something, some complete rip-off.
Beluga.
It's just some crap search engine.
Some stuff like that, I guess, it depends how it's done. Obviously, it's case by case, but some of it, I just acknowledge it as you have some fundamental building blocks that you need to get out of the way to do the story that you want to do. And then some stuff, it's just going to feel rushed. Other times, it's going to feel more belabored. And I don't know, some stuff, like I said, it comes with the territory, and that all lines up with being like a learned horror fan or being someone who like knows to look out for that stuff. And then, like you said, you can have fun with it. Like, I enjoy that stuff too, because it's just sort of, it's almost like getting like a mission. I just bring it back to gaming, getting some sort of mission briefing for something, and it's just like you just take it as natural. Like it wasn't until BioShock in 2007 that anybody questioned a tutorial. So it's like in a horror film, we're sort of questioning it now because so much time has passed with so many of these movies, but like, or at least we're aware of it. But at the same time, sometimes depending on the film, I'm just kind of like, okay, read your thing, Google your thing, realize what we're up against, and then we can move forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said before, it's just sort of shorthand to get to the action a bit quicker. You know what I mean? To like push the story along at a breakneck pace, so then you can get to like the proper scares. And I think if it's done in that way, when it isn't the entire plot, and the entire plot hinges on like the cliche, I'm mostly here for it. Like it does sort of just become this thing. Like you don't really question or you don't really sort of notice until after the fact and you're sort of thinking about it. You're like, that was a bit silly. That was a bit dumb. I probably wouldn't have scripted it like that. And I do think, obviously, you know, in terms of the Googling thing, especially, I think we can get some new interesting ways to convey that information visually on the screen to make it a bit more appealing. But
Bluetooth headsets weren't as outlawed as they are in regards to no one could ever pull one of them off, and they sort of just slowly went away. You maybe get more, you know, in the moment, ghost hunters, zombie hunters, whatever, being relayed information as they were doing stuff, and you could have all sorts of awesome revelations in regards to that. But Bluetooth headsets were just that lame that they wrote that entire idea out of horror history.
And also, Scott, you can't use a phone because in every horror movie ever, the phones just don't have any signal or they get wrecked. And this is what I particularly like recently because, you know, when makes us sound really old, but when phones, you know, became an actual, you know, everyday part of the world and everyone had a smartphone or whatever, it broke horror in a way because it was like, well, how can this situation be scary when I'm connected to literally everyone on the planet? You know what I mean? And then obviously we got to the classic cliche of, well, there's just no signal. But now, I like that we finally evolved beyond that a little bit. And now most movies like contrive a reason to make the fact that there is no signal and no service and no phones like actually horrific. Like there is a bit in Strangers Pray at Night, the second one, where like the characters have their like phone sabotaged and stuff. And I always think that's genuinely scary because the idea of, you know, leaving your phone on like a table to charge and then coming back to it and realizing that someone has been in or something has been in and kind of like sabotaged it, like that to me, it not only fulfills the cliche of, you know, eliminating that from the story, but does it in a genuinely, you know, horrific way, at least in my eyes.
No, I think there's way more. The thing is, it's not really a horror, but searching. I thought that was just such a great way of saying, look how much of our lives we put into these things, and look how much, you know, someone needs to try. Like the thing is, like obviously in that movie, it's a father trying to find his missing daughter, and I just think that like that was such a realization of you could feasibly do this, you could feasibly use all these apps, these sort of ways of tracking someone down. I kind of feel like the example that you just mentioned, The Strangers Pray at Night, like that should be a gateway into doing more cerebral horror with your phone, because it is a realistic. When you lose your phone, it feels horrible. It feels like you've lost a part of yourself. You've lost all this identity, and it's out there somewhere. And I think that's probably something that will be done in future horrors. Like, you know, play directly into the technology mindset of just how much of ourselves are on these devices. But like you said, in terms of it being a cliche, again, I kind of treat it as like a building block thing, because it is just sort of, we need X number of people to be isolated over here. Therefore, can't just ring the police.
It's funny that you mentioned that because like you said, you know, not to go all old man yells at cloud or whatever, but like, you put so much of yourself into your phone or your online profile or whatever. And to me, there's always been some kind of like abject horror in the idea of having my phone stolen. And it's not because of anything that's on it. Like, I don't know, any kind of subscriptions or, you know, credit card information or whatever. It's always the fact that they get to see your personal details. You know what I mean? They get to see your photos, they get to see your text messages or whatever. And like, that's always been the thing that like freaks me out the most. Someone having that intimate knowledge of you more than anything else.
Like financial side of it can be, so you can ring those companies, you can shut those cards down, you can block all those things, but you can't get those photos back, and you can't get that knowledge back, that someone else has that knowledge of you. And it's like I remember when I was a kid and I lost my house key for the first time, and I was like, oh my God, someone's going to come into my house. They're going to somehow figure out it's this house. And so like, I think, like I said, there's probably more that can be done with that. But it is like you said, it is an established cliche for a reason. I just kind of hope that it goes somewhere way more creepy at some point in the future, like have a defined movie, like defining point in horror cinema that focuses directly on that stuff.
I think it's a lot to ask, man, because when it comes to sort of, and this is probably an entirely different podcast topic to address in the future, but when it comes to, you know, technology in horror, especially, you know, back in the early 2000s when you had all of those internet horror movies like fear.com or whatever, like they just were embarrassing and bad, and you got like video game horror movies which were embarrassing and bad, and, you know, spread this idea of video games causing violence or whatever. And we even had that with TV, you know, back in the 80s, I guess, with like the likes of Videodrome, although Videodrome did it very well, but you got a lot of movies that didn't do it very well. And I feel like we're now finally getting to the point with, like movies with Searching or Unfriended or Host from this year. We're actually getting directors who use the technology that we use every day and do it in a way that feels natural and organic and actually human. We're not getting these sort of almost kind of inhuman alien presentations of them that are so detached from reality that there's no horror in it, because I'm not going to fear.com and typing in, a ghost, and there's no ghost appearing on the screen, but someone taking my phone, someone hacking a ghost hacking my Facebook profile, as in the case of in Unfriended, like that there's something spooky in there that sort of rings true to real human fears, I suppose.
Yeah, I want to see more stuff like that. I think I don't know, there's hardly any films that have really broached that have taken something that is completely everyday. I mean, for me, that was why Host took off so much, because it was like, obviously we're living through that right now, webcam stuff, Zoom chats, things like that, and just weaponizing that, like, whatever the filmic equivalent of weaponizing it is, take something that's so obvious and make that the core of something that you can sort of take and run with.
I think it's because I think it's just so hard, because if you get even one sort of small detail right, like you said, we use these features so much, they comprise so much of our everyday life, that if you even get one thing kind of off, it sticks out much more
outdated
than anything
firmware
else.
Or the wrong model of a phone, or
even if like a system that doesn't quite work as it does in real life, I think it sort of breaks the immersion in a way that, even though everything else we talked about today, and there's certainly cliches and stuff, they become cemented in the language of horror, where it's sort of like it's natural in a horror movie, if that makes sense. And I don't think there are in terms of tech when it comes to sort of that level of, it's not baked into the text in the same way. We are actually almost coming to the end of this.
Sweet Jesus, Josh Brown.
Somehow. I don't know how, but I want to jump through just a few kind of fan favorites, I suppose. And I want to know, Scott Salford, whether you are yay or nay on them. So first up, I've got The Car Never Starts, which frustrates me to no hell. And I used to think that I didn't like this one, because I was like, of course the car doesn't start. But watching things recently, and I don't know whether I've just got more anxious as I grow older, but that is, I hate it when it happens, but it undeniably works. I undeniably feel the same frustration and terror in that moment. And even though I've seen it a million times before, it still gets me. And I don't want it to get me, but it does.
I think I don't feel like it's been in a major mainstream horror in a little while, whereas I feel like it was it was in every teen slasher, it was in every sort of 2000s film, horror film, and so like I'm a yay for this, but I think that I would become a nay if it started being overused again. It has to fundamentally, I'm all about authenticity. It has to fit in, like it'll make sense in Final Destination, because those forces are trying to keep those teenagers in that car, so they're not going to go anywhere and whatever. But if it was just some random, I don't know, in the new Texas Chainsaw, if the end of that film is her trying to get in a car this time or something like that, or somebody trying to escape, and then the car just randomly doesn't work, then it can feel quite tiring, even though like it's expected and it is comfort blankety and elsewhere.
Yeah, sticking with the car theme, I've got the stranger or the ghoul or the whatever being in the back seat, because that was, growing up with horror movies, that was one of the most scariest ideas I could just ever have. I think it's having that sort of like, the familiarity and the intimacy of like having it being your car, but also that split second of the feeling that someone's there, and also just having that little, like the rear view mirror or whatever, having that small space to look into, and just being that being all you see when you look in the back seat, like, that's always got me.
No, totally. I'm a massive yay for this one. There's that really great one in Haunting of Hill House, where they just told the two people in the front of the car to just do that entire conversation, and the guy in the back to just jump in at whatever point he wanted to, and they're just insanely effective. There's something about the comfort of what a car should mean, and that it's just you on the road. You can't stop, you can't jump out. You're going to have to deal with whatever's in there with you. Which reminds me of when a bee came in my car once, and I had to drive with a little bee next to me. And it was horrible, Josh Brown. And if that bee had a knife, mate, it would have been so much worse. But it's a
good point, man. Like, you know what? Every time a wasp gets in my flat, because I'm almost certain there's a wasp's nest right above my window, I always think this would be much worse if that wasp had a knife. What would I do? I don't know. But
if someone wants to make bee with a knife and just have it fly into a car, then you heard it here first.
I like that. I think it's a good title. I don't think you need to change anything. Yeah. Bee with a knife. And then on the cover is a bee with a knife, and
B-movie
then
2?
you make $100 million. Well, B-movie 2. This time it's a horror film. I have one final one to sort of wrap up with, and this is sort of a modern classic, I would say. And it's the thing that kind of comes from Paranormal Activity, and it's the duvet pull. It's replaced the rug pull, but it's someone being in bed, and suddenly a supernatural force at the end starts tugging on the little bed sheets, and then you have to go, oh no.
I feel like, oh no, I feel like this is way more popular than I think it looks funny. I don't think it looks effective. When it happened in Paranormal Activity, I laughed. And I just don't think it looks good. Because to me, it doesn't make sense that a ghost would just be all cheeky about it and just drag you a little bit out of bed. Like, it's not going to do that. Like, I know that's so stupid, and that's like a very specific set of horror rules. It obviously depends on the creature and everything else like that. But in Paranormal Activity, it was just this sort of like, Beatles About type ghost that was just sort of pranking people, and it wasn't right. So I want more than a cheeky duvet pull. For me.
I know what you mean. Like, I'm conflicted on this one because I feel like I've seen it far too much for it to be scary. And I feel like I also agree, like, I think it looks a bit dumb when it's done wrong, when it looks a bit just sort of
that
silly.
That wire's pulling her leg.
Yeah, I'm like, why are you doing this? But also, I've seen it done kind of like effectively. I was watching Shutter again at the weekend, which is this really good Thai horror film from like 2004, I would say. It doesn't really matter, but the point is, there's a scene where this guy like wakes up and he's getting the duvet kind of like pulled down, and he sort of looks, and it's not that it's just getting pulled off by a ghost, but there's like a monster in the bed, like at the end of the bed. Trying to, like,
stuff in the bed's very good. Anything that's under the sheets with you, yeah.
Well, this is it. This is why I'm conflicted, because while I think the effect sometimes looks a bit dumb, the idea of something being in the bed with you, or something, or even having your legs outside the bed, freaks me out, and I feel unsafe. Like, again, going back to some of my most terrifying, scary scenarios when I was growing up and watching horror, it was the person in the backseat, and it was the fact that the person sleeping beside you wasn't who you thought it was. Like, that is something that also terrifies me, and something that you can't actually reconcile in real life without being a kind of creepy person, because you can't just be like, oh, just checking you're real, just checking you're who I think you are. It doesn't work. You get kicked out.
Hair a bit. Yeah.
In my experience, you just get kicked out.
I think anything that, like I said, zeroes in on any sense of comfort. I think that's potentially a whole other topic of conversation. But I think that we live our lives, and I do mean everybody like lives their lives so openly now, especially in comparison to how we did in the 2000s. And it's through mobile phones, it's through social media, it's through all these outlets that you project a different version of yourself online, or you at least project yourself online in some form. So there are fewer places to be completely safe now, or at least I feel like there are fewer places where you can just sit and be you and not worry about having to send something out or whatever. And so like that could be a car ride, that could be getting some sleep, like a nap or whatever. It could be a quiet webcam chat with just one person instead of a group chat. And so to pick those and then run with them like as horror ideas, I'm all there for that.
I fully am as well. I think you've ended that very nicely. I want to know what everyone else thinks. Down in the comments below, where do you fall on horror movie cliches? And are there any that are your favorites? Are there any that just constantly show up that you should be annoyed by, and you can take some glee every single time they appear and still get scared like I do? So yeah, if you're watching this on YouTube, could you leave us a comment and a like and a subscribe and everything else? And if you're not watching this, and listening to this, could you go over to check out What Culture Horror on Twitter? It is under the handle W Culture Horror, and leave us any kind of comments or questions that we will hopefully get around to answering in a future episode. But until then, I have been Josh. You can follow me on Twitter at Josh Brune with 2 O's, joined by Scott Tailford, who you can follow on Twitter at.
I am at /LP89.
And we will see you on the next one. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Be with a knife.
Be with a knife.
Be with a knife. That's the name of the show. 2 B's, 1 knife.